and the meeting will be broadcast throughout the building. There is an issue just with, I think, the streaming going out on the internet, but it is available and it is being publicly broadcast and will be picked up in terms of the feed from the meeting. If you can do the needful with any electronic devices. There's apologies from some members. Mr. Hazard's obviously in the education bill, and I know some other members will come in and out of the meeting. Today's obviously to do with the evidence session, so if the Minister's here, he's welcome to come in. At our meeting on the 15th of October, the committee discussed the BBC Spotlight programme that was broadcast on the 14th of October this year, and we agreed to request the attendance of the Minister to discuss how he intends to investigate the allegations made in the programme regarding potential interference in the justice process. Is the Minister here? Do we know when he's coming? He's in his room. He's coming downstairs very shortly. Do you want me to run up? Please, he knows that this was starting at 11:30, so.
That's right. Dreadful behaviour by a Minister. Keep a committee waiting.
We'll wait on the Minister.
It's the Minister of Code, is it?
Sure needs to show us. Yes, no.
Mr. Elliott, you're very welcome. You're obviously not the Minister.
No. Absolutely.
We are currently.
Pleased you made that observation.
We're all excited when you walked in there.
We are currently broadcasting live because we started the meeting anticipating the Minister, who's now arrived and is very welcome to the meeting. So, Minister, you're welcome for joining us. Apologies for starting the meeting. I understood you were at the door. However, that was obviously not the case, so apologies for that.
I think I was at the door of the building rather than the door of the room, Chair.
Okay, well, obviously this is on the back of the BBC Spotlight programme that was broadcast on the 14th of October, and the committee sought to have this meeting with you, and I appreciate you facilitating at short notice the committee request to come today. Obviously you're joined by Karen Pearson, who's your Deputy Director in the Criminal Justice Policy and Legislation Division from within the Department. And normal procedures will apply. It will be broadcast, covered by Hansard and published in due course. So, Minister, I'm going to hand over to you at this stage. Obviously the committee was interested to know how you intended to take forward dealing with the allegations that have been made, and at this point I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Chair, for the invitation to come to the committee today to discuss the recent Spotlight programme, specifically the allegations made by Maria Cahill of sexual abuse and rape over a prolonged period that began when she was just 16 years old, all compounded by what amounted to a kangaroo court and threats if she spoke to anyone, including the police, about her ordeal. I would firstly want to commend Ms Cahill for her bravery in coming forward at this time. It is an understatement to say it will not be an easy time for her. The story told by Maria is harrowing, and I would want to deal with the questions raised with the sensitivity that they deserve. The allegations in this case are particularly abhorrent in that they took place against a young woman, against a background of threat and enforced silence. It is also worrying that Ms Cahill has said that she's been contacted by others who tell similar stories to her own, and I would urge these people to come forward to the police or others who can help, ideally to secure prosecutions. Many allegations have also been made in terms of how Ms Cahill's case was handled when she did, after some time, find the strength to report the matter to the PSNI, and her subsequent engagement with the criminal justice system. These include delay, inaction, insensitivity and political interference. As in all such cases, it is important to establish the facts as far as possible, and I appreciate that the committee session today is part of that process. It is important also to note and to acknowledge the role of the various criminal justice agencies and their independence in operational matters. Independence does not, of course, mean that there is no accountability, and I would expect the agencies concerned to be as open as possible about the events, all of which impact on confidence in the criminal justice system. There is also due process to consider. It is clear that in this case, the police investigation considered there to be sufficient evidence to refer to the matter to the Public Prosecution Service. The PPS, in turn, brought a prosecution on the basis that there was a reasonable chance of a conviction and that it was in the public interest to do so. The 5 defendants in the case pleaded not guilty, but the trial did not go ahead. Ms. Cahill withdrew her evidence. In the absence of evidence, the prosecution withdrew their case and the defendants were acquitted. It is important not to draw any conclusions of guilt in this case, as the evidence was not tested in court as required. Not all prosecutions result in a conviction. I know that this can cause feelings of betrayal and hurt by victims and their representatives who invest so much in the investigation and prosecution of their case. It is clear that Ms. Cahill feels let down by the system. This is understandable, but it is important to see that the laws of evidence and due process are applied across the justice system. I know that Ms. Cahill at the end of the day felt unable to give her evidence. That is her right, and no one should be critical of her decision. What I as Minister have to be sure about is that the conditions are in place to ensure that the process of giving evidence is as good as it can be for victims and witnesses, especially in difficult cases such as sexual assault and rape. As you know, there have been considerable efforts in this area in recent times, aided of course, Chair, by your committee's own inquiry into victims and witnesses. I regret that none of these measures appear to have been helpful in Ms. Cahill's case. There has been a complaint made about aspects of the police investigation in this case. The complaint has been properly referred to the Police Ombudsman for investigation, and that work is ongoing. I'd be keen to see the outcome of the Ombudsman's investigation. It will, of course, take time to complete properly, but the outcome will usefully inform us if there are any lessons to learn about the police process. I also understand that the Director of Public Prosecutions has announced this morning that he is establishing an independent review of the prosecutorial systems and processes in relation to 3 interlinked cases involving sex abuse and terrorist-related charges that were highlighted in the Spotlight programme. I welcome the Director's decision to establish a review and share the concern of the Director to maintain public confidence in the wider justice system. Should the Ombudsman's investigation or the PPS review indicate any deficiencies within the wider justice system, I would expect the relevant agencies to proactively examine their role in this case to identify and make good any problems. We must act on any lessons to be learned from this case. I fully appreciate that delay can add unnecessary stress and anxiety to victims, and I'm determined to speed up our justice system. My department is working with the criminal justice agencies to deliver a range of ambitious reforms in order to speed up processing times in criminal cases. The Justice Bill, which is currently before the Assembly, proposes a number of measures to address avoidable delay, such as committal reform, provisions to encourage early guilty pleas, and the introduction of statutory case management powers to help ensure that criminal cases progress as swiftly as possible. This is a far-reaching programme of statutory and procedural reform. The changes proposed have been shaped by input from victim support groups and victims themselves. They're designed to streamline the system and ensure that cases do not take any longer than they have to. Finally, there have been suggestions of political interference in this case. I would want to make it absolutely clear that during my tenure as Justice Minister, I have not, nor would I, interfere in any cases before the criminal justice system. Furthermore, I have resisted and will continue to resist, in the strongest terms, any attempt by others to do so. I will conclude my remarks on that point, Chair, but of course I'm happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Okay, Minister. Thank you for those opening comments. In terms of the broadcast that the BBC Spotlight programme highlighted, the allegations were that the police service didn't do its investigation thoroughly enough, also that the PPS didn't do its job properly. And obviously, in both accounts, both the Police Ombudsman's Office and now today the Director of the PPS are investigating and have set up independent inquiries in respect of that. But do you, Minister, feel it would not be more appropriate that you would establish some kind of public inquiry that would be independent to deal with the PSNI, the Public Prosecution Service? Given that also included in the allegations, and I think it was Mark Durkan who said this, that a previous Secretary of State was aware of the case to establish what involvement there may have been or otherwise by him, both of which the Ombudsman nor an independent review of the PPS can investigate?
I think the difficulty at this stage, Chair, is we are talking about a single case, although there are allegations of other cases which may be involved. The formal complaint has been made to the Ombudsman about the behaviour of the PSNI, and I believe that it is essential that that is carried through. Similarly, I take it members will have seen the statement from the Director about the PPS inquiry, which came out this morning, which is an indication of that review. I think there is very little that could be done prior to hearing from those. Those are the two specific ways in which the individual agencies can be investigated. It's a difficult issue to see how we join up something, particularly when you also highlight something pre-devolution, and I'm not quite sure what powers the DOJ would have to investigate or to set up an inquiry to investigate what happened under the watch of the NIO. I would certainly be very concerned to see what reports come back from the Ombudsman and from the PPS's inquiry. I think the important issue would then also be to see whether others are persuaded to come forward, those who Ms Cahill says you have spoken to her, because clearly there then become issues of a pattern which may take it into a different realm from a single individual case.
What time frame do you think would be acceptable for the Police Ombudsman's Office and this review of the PPS to be completed and obviously published?
It's very difficult to say what would be acceptable, since on all these occasions we want to see the inquiry done thoroughly and speedily, and those are not always compatible. But I do tend to think that thorough is more important than speedy.
See, here's my difficulty, Minister, with leaving this with the Police Ombudsman's Office and leaving this with the PPS's announcement. I did make a complaint to the Police Ombudsman's Office on the 8th of October in 2013 on the back of the UTV's insight in relation to Anya Adams, and over a year later I'm still waiting on the Police Ombudsman's Office to deal with what are very similar allegations and similar complaints. I got a letter from the Ombudsman's Office on the 10th of April from the investigating officer who told me my report is complete. It's been forwarded to my senior managers for their approval. That was on the 10th of April. 6 months later, I haven't heard a response from the Ombudsman's Office, from the Police Ombudsman himself, and I have been in correspondence complaining about that and wanting to know about the delays. Now, if you're telling me, here we have another case, very similar, let's leave it to the Police Ombudsman's Office, who, in my view, has compounded the issues that were first raised with that office when I made the complaint on the 8th of October, I don't have confidence that the Police Ombudsman's Office will deal with this. That's why I have a difficulty in putting the Ombudsman's Office forward. Second point to that, the Public Prosecution Service, at that same time, I had been in contact with that office. I wanted them to carry out an independent investigation, and Barry McGrory subsequently announced he was inviting the Attorney-General to have an independent investigation into how the Public Prosecution Service had handled the specific issues around Gerry Adams and what he did or didn't know in respect of the abuse that his niece suffered. The Attorney-General has carried out that report. He has been in correspondence with this committee. He has made recommendations. One can only assume that's because the PPS had failings, otherwise why make recommendations? And yet the PPS today say they want openness and transparency, still haven't released the findings of that independent report that he invited the Attorney-General to do a year ago. So therefore, how can we allow this position to continue when the PPS and the Police Ombudsman have failed to deal with very similar allegations over a year ago that I raised with them? And therefore, in the interests of public confidence in the administration of justice, not just of the police service, not just of the Public Prosecution Service, but the Police Ombudsman's Office, I believe that you should be seriously considering a public inquiry into how those particular agencies have handled the Maria Cahill case and the case in respect of Anya, which I had already made complaints to.
Well, you make specific complaints about the timing of the publication of a report. You said that the Ombudsman's Office hadn't investigated. It appeared that they had investigated, but they haven't reported, which is not quite the same thing, though I accept it is still an issue of concern if there are reports which have not been published. In the case of Maria Cahill, the complaint, as I understand it, is sufficiently recent that the Ombudsman's Office could not have been expected to have produced a report on it. But I do need to be careful, given the statutory roles of other agencies. There are, of course, also issues which relate to the wider governance issues around the PPS and the fact that no arrangements have been made since devolution for dealing with questions around the PPS to be answered by the Attorney-General on the floor of the Assembly. That is an issue which is the responsibility of OFM-DFM. My officials have been assisting officials in that department, but no conclusion has been reached within OFM-DFM as to how matters should proceed, and obviously the Committee of Procedures will then have a role as well. So there are a number of complex issues, very few of which actually lie to the Department of Justice, though obviously I am concerned to ensure that we find the best way of seeing that the system is working properly and appropriately. And you've certainly raised issues which I was unaware of this morning about the timings of the publication of the report into your complaints about the Anya Adams issue, which certainly raised some concerns for me if reports have been completed but not published. If that is the case, then there are issues which would concern me in order to see that justice is being done speedily.
Okay, I'll bring in other members and then I'll want to pick up on some more points. Mr McGlone.
Yep. Thanks very much, Chair. Minister, just I was picking up on the issues that you raised there, and you said a lot of complex issues, and nobody would disagree with that, but ultimately, at the end of the day, where there is a victim and justice needs to be served and needs to be done, we all have a duty in that regard. But you mentioned complex issues, few of which lie to your office. Of those that do lie to your office, what consideration have you given to those complex issues that do lie with your office and the responsibility that lies with your office, and what actions would there be against those issues which lie with your office in regard to this or other cases?
I may have actually been exaggerating when I say few lie to my office, because what lies to my office is the overall issue of the working of the justice system. But that is almost, in every respect, the responsibility of independent agencies which are independently accountable to different oversight mechanisms. I mean, the police are not accountable to me operationally. The PPS are entirely independent. Whilst administration of courts is a matter for the DOJ, judicial decisions are clearly not. So it is always a major issue, as we've looked, for example, at speeding up justice in general terms, that there are major problems in the management of independent agencies which have their own responsibilities by a department which has a coordinating function, perhaps, but not an operational function in any of these areas.
So you're saying you have no responsibility or no duty in this?
Well, as I say, my wider duty is about looking at the overall issues and the sort of work which officials have been doing on the speeding up justice area, but each of the independent agencies is responsible for how they carry out their duties.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to get from you, Minister. Obviously, you're coming along. You're prepared for coming to this committee today, and for probably the
that may be an exaggeration after yesterday, but anyway.
Well, right. We all had to go through that too. But in terms of, you'd have sat down with your officials and you'd have looked at what falls to me here. The buck stops. What part of the buck stops with me? What is my duty? What's my responsibility here? What issues do I have to tackle as Minister? That's basically what I'm seeking clarity from you on.
Frankly, we're almost in the same territory as one of the questions I answered from your colleague Dominic Bradley at question time yesterday, relating to the issue of an individual case where he asked me to meet the parents of a murder victim. And my response was, I have frequently met victims of crime. I am prepared to meet them. But what I can actually do, if anything, will be very limited. And that is the reality of the way the justice system is constructed. That there is very little direct responsibility for the operation of the criminal justice system, which lies with the department. And yet we have overarching responsibilities to seek to enhance public confidence by, for example, speeding up justice.
Right. Have you an opinion at all on the alleged political interference in the case?
Well, As David Ford, Alliance politician, I might have an opinion on political interference. As Minister of Justice, I need to be extremely careful that what we have at this stage is purely an allegation or a series of allegations from an individual in a television programme. Now, it is clear that Ms Cahill suffered a degree of trauma, whatever exactly happened, but as to the precise nature of those allegations which she has made but have not been tested in court, yes, I need to be extremely careful.
Right. And then finally, and just read the statement from the Public Prosecution Service and from the Director of Public Prosecution, Barry McGrory. In your mind, is what he's proposing sufficient to deal with this issue?
Well, I need to be careful in saying whether it's sufficient or insufficient. What it does seem to me is that it takes this particular issue further than what has been the established practice of the PPS in recent years, which started really under Alistair Fraser and then was carried forward by Jimmy Scholes and now by Barry McGrory, of giving explanations, responding to concerns that people express as to how they have carried out their duties. And I think this takes it to a slightly higher level in terms of bringing in the independent review to look at the way the issue is handled. There were complexities about different criminal cases covering different aspects of the allegations being run together, and I think in that case it's entirely appropriate that the PPS has set up his review of the procedures. In fact, the DPP has set up his review of procedures within the PPS. It will be initially to draw conclusions, and that may then inform the wider kind of points that the Chair has spoken of.
And do you feel that there's a requirement on those other agencies out with your immediate control to conduct a similar line of investigation?
Well, really, the two agencies that we're talking about in this case are the police and the PPS, and the Ombudsman is covering the police aspect, and the PPS independent review appears to go further than the Director would normally go. So I think in that sense, we have two inquiries at this point, or an inquiry and a review. We need to see what the outcome of that is. And the point I also made, that I would encourage any others who may have spoken to Maria Cahill about similar allegations to come forward to the police.
And finally, just picking up on that, thank you for your indulgence, Chair. It was mentioned on the Nolan show this morning, social services had been involved or had been reported to. Do you feel that there's any form of inquiry required there through that department or through the particular trust that may be involved?
Well, not having heard the Nolan programme this morning, I'm not sure exactly the detail of that, but I mean, if there are issues concerning behaviour of staff in social services, then that would very much be a matter for either the Minister of Health, Social Services and Public Safety or a body like RQIA to get involved in. It's not an issue for the justice system, but again, it's the point where issues may emerge that may then impact.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Page.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Chairman, we've some experience of inquiries in the past, and we need to cut to the chase here. I discovered quite a number of years ago that the Northern Ireland Events Company wasn't behaving appropriately and brought it to the attention of civil servants, and they didn't do much about it. And a couple of months later they came to me and said, we discovered a really big problem here. And the problem was £1.6 million in a relatively small organisation. And an inquiry was initiated, and I think last week or the week before, after spending £1.2 million on an inquiry which hasn't been published, the thing is now buried. So we've managed to have an inquiry which has lasted 7 years, which has cost the public nearly as much money as was lost in the first place, and nobody is any the wiser. I was involved in another inquiry which was around Pseudomonas, which took place very publicly and very quickly over the course of a number of months. Recommendations were made and acted upon, and that is the difference in inquiries. We can be open and frank about things, Mr. Chairman, and seek to find resolutions, or we can use inquiries as a means of burying things. Sadly, whenever we have the police ombudsman taking over a year for an inquiry, not responding to this committee in the last 6 months, That's not an acceptable form of inquiry. Whenever I get an email from the Public Prosecution Service that says they're going to have another inquiry, but in a very similar circumstance, I know you said one case, I think the Anya Adams case is completely irrelevant and appropriate to this as well. We've already had an inquiry which has been going on for over a year into that, and there's recommendations. Do you know what the recommendations were? Have any of these recommendations been acted upon, or why has this been buried? So we have a great fear, Mr. Chairman, that these inquiries are being used to bury the truth and bury facts. And we need to get away from that. And we need to get to the place where we have inquiries which actually identify what the issues are, that are done and conducted in an open and honest way, and we move things forward.
Well, I can only say in general terms about the work of the Police Ombudsman's Office that their reports are published. I see reports on a regular basis. I tend to see them a few days before they are published and in the press. And that is the general policy of the Ombudsman's Office, and that will include references to if guidance has been issued or disciplinary action has been recommended and the outcome of that within the police service. Individuals will not be named, but in all other respects, the outcome of the Ombudsman's inquiries is made fully public. So I mean, I'm not sure why the delay between the apparent conclusion of the work, unless there is other work being done, which the initial investigating officer hasn't been told about, in the case that the chair highlighted was. But it's not the pattern that I see when I see regularly reports coming through from Ombudsman's investigations. I mean, I don't mean them, the minor, issues of, a police officer was rude to me, but I mean, major issues involving incidents which cause injury or risk.
Well, Chairman, I'm sure the Minister, and I know at a personal level he will recognise this, we're dealing with extremely vulnerable people. Victims of abuse who are children, whether it be sexual abuse or physical abuse. Many of them will live with that abuse for the rest of their lives. It is something which traumatises them. And to actually come forward and relate that abuse is something which is a very traumatic experience for them. And I'm sure the Minister agrees with me that we need to be facilitating these people and encouraging these people and seeking to address the issues on behalf of these people in as far as that is possible. Now, there's an allegation here that it's not just an allegation, that's a fact, that the PSNI took 4 years to bring forward the case on Maria Cahill. Now, she would believe, and makes very clear that her view, that was damaging to her case and to her personally. That's something that obviously needs to be addressed and inquiry made into why it took 4 years for the police to investigate that case. Mark Durkan made specific allegations about comments that were made by Sean Woodward. Now, I would have had many disagreements with Mark on a whole range of issues. He's a former finance minister and a former deputy first minister in this assembly, and I've always found him to be honourable. I don't believe that he's lying, and I would expect that you probably don't believe, the Minister doesn't believe that he's lying either. Those are well without the scope of any police ombudsman or anybody else to investigate or inquire about. So there's things here, Mr. Chairman, that we really need to get to the truth about, and people like Sean Woodward need to stand up and make a case that it wasn't. I'm more concerned about poor Porrick than I am about the victim of child sex abuse. So, the normal conventions, what I'm saying, the normal conventions is not acceptable. Will you look at it and seek to address that and find another means of investigating some of these matters?
Well, I mean, the issue of the remarks by the former Secretary of State are, as I said initially, I think, somewhat out with my role. Clearly, there would be concerns if that was the view being expressed by a Secretary of State as Secretary of State, rather than a very unfortunate remark by an individual, and that's what I'm not quite sure of in the way that that particular point was handled. But he is not part of the formal justice system. My primary concern I say primary, it's not the sole concern. My primary concern is around the functioning of the justice system and the kind of work which has been done by the Department in conjunction with the committee over the last 4 years to improve the way the justice system treats victims and vulnerable witnesses. And I do think that we collectively have a good tale to tell of significant improvements. But it is also clear that the case of Maria Cahill has highlighted that we haven't got things as good as they ought to be yet. And that's where I do think that the issue has to be as to the formal oversight of the justice system agencies in the first instance.
And I don't disagree with the Minister, Mr. Chairman, but if we are identifying political interference in issues of child sex abuse, where does that take us? And I think it takes us to a similar place to where the Republic of Ireland were years ago, when political interference was involved with Brenton Smith, Father Brenton Smith, and it brought down a government. So let's be very clear about the seriousness of this allegation. If people were politically interfering at the level of Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to cover up child abuse, to in some way protect another process, that is something that we need to know the truth about, and it's something that I would find totally and wholly unacceptable.
Minister, you have indicated that you are responsible for ensuring there's overall general public confidence in the criminal justice system, the administration of that justice system. Surely that remit in and of itself would allow you and mandate you to be looking at issues which you may necessarily feel don't automatically fit within your department because the PPS is an independent body. They're not an isolationist body. They're part of the criminal justice system which you have a duty to ensure general public confidence in, and that's being called into question. It's being called into question by victims, and the independent reports of the Attorney General, the reports by the Police Ombudsman, of which were conducted over a year ago and have been completed and not published, still remain unpublished, and therefore confidence in them is being called into question, not least that the Director of the PPS is so conflicted on these issues that he isn't himself able to handle them and has to pass them off to other people to do it. That in itself is an issue that causes concern by way of public confidence. So surely you have a duty to set up an inquiry that would facilitate these issues so that, as you said earlier in the meeting, people can have confidence to come forward and make these reports to the police, knowing that they will be treated properly, because at the moment there's a real concern that they won't be. And that's an intolerable position for anybody in our society to feel that there are untouchables. And that's something that needs to be addressed.
Well, you raise a number of different points there, Chair. I mean, it is not my role to defend the Director of Public Prosecutions, but I think it should be noted that anybody who is appointed to that role may well have been involved in a different way with individuals or with cases which may then come to his notice. And there's a perfectly established procedure for other senior people within the PPS to take responsibilities where the Director recuses himself because of past associations. And I think we need to be very careful in suggesting that he cannot do his job because he has practiced as a lawyer in Northern Ireland, but he can defend that particular point. I mean, the issues you raise about concerns of people being untouchable are clearly issues of some concern. The issues of whether there is confidence for people to potentially come forward now, I would hope that if nothing else, through the publicity given to the Maria Cahill case and the fact that it is now clearly high on the political agenda as the fact that this committee is taking interest, is the kind of issue which should reassure other possible victims, the people of whom Maria has spoken, that they would be in a position to come forward and have better treatment than perhaps she did, because it is certainly clear that the issue has been raised in a way which has become a more significant issue than perhaps when one woman went to the police with a complaint. But I repeat again, that whilst there are general issues for me, and I will certainly be looking in detail at the allegations which were made in the Spotlight programme, which I have not yet had the chance to go through in detail with officials, that there are issues for us, and I'm very concerned that the work we have done around protecting victims and vulnerable witnesses is carried forward in this case as in any other case. But I do think that I need to be careful in suggesting that that work can come into play and subsume the work which is actually the formal statutory responsibility of other people. It's a matter of trying to find the best way we can provide the support for people like Maria, given the limited role that the department has, or indeed that this committee has at this stage. And I repeat the point that some of the other allegations, the Mark Durkan point about Sean Woodward, is difficult to see whether that was a statement of a cover-up or a rather grossly unfortunate comment without specific consequence. Those are issues which I accept do fall outside the Ombudsman and the PPS role, but it's not clear, and it perhaps be something which we need to look at in a little bit more detail, those other tangential aspects. We see the proper procedures being carried through in the first instance by the agencies with the statutory responsibility.
Thank you. Mr Dixon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming to us this morning. The role of the Police Ombudsman is a very important one, and in terms of public confidence for the Ombudsman, it has to be essential that that office is given time and space to perform their function, and that's how public confidence in it is assured. If there are delays, then those are matters for the person or people who are raising those queries to raise with. And I think it would amount to interference if we were to ask you to raise with the Ombudsman issues with regards to delay. It can only be at a point where the Ombudsman indicates to a complainant that you're not getting your report or something like that, that those issues should actually ultimately be raised with the Department of Justice. Again, I'm sure Minister would agree with me that the role of the Public Prosecution Service is key to the independence of the judiciary, is key to the whole concept of the checks and balances within our justice system, and that it's important that where there are queries and concerns about their actions or the actions of others, that they too should be given appropriate space. It is only, really the point I'm trying to make is, it is only at a point in time when it is clear that there is either cover-up by these organisations or a refusal to publish the results of inquiries, that it is appropriate for this committee or others to come to the Department of Justice and make those complaints. And certainly in respect of the Police Ombudsman, they have to be given the space, and that space clearly is only beginning at this point in time. I would like the Minister to think about those questions. Chair, this might be slightly unusual. I have a question to ask of you. You have indicated that you have raised a number of matters with the Police Ombudsman. Can I ask for clarity? Have you raised those in a personal capacity, or as a member of the Assembly, or have you raised them on behalf of this committee?
The Police Ombudsman one has been as an individual MLA.
Yeah.
And the Public Prosecution Service, they invited the Attorney General to do its review. Subsequently, this committee did engage on that issue, and the committee did formally write to the Attorney General and Barry McGrory. So the PPS AG issue is something that the committee has got involved in. The Police Ombudsman is one that I have dealt with as an individual MLA, not as chairman of this committee.
And I'm sure as an individual MLA you will be more than able to pursue those matters with the Ombudsman and ultimately recognise the time when you should go to the Minister of Justice to make complaint about it. But returning to the Minister...
So could I interrupt you there a second, Stuart? I mean, given what I've said about my caution, if members of the committee think it would be helpful for me to write as Minister to say this issue has been raised, and whilst I clearly cannot ask for anything more than an indication of timescale published, I believe it would be helpful if matters are concluded that they were published as early as possible. I think that is entirely reasonable within my overall responsibilities without going into the detail. So perhaps I could clarify that point. If Chair, you think that would be helpful?
Well, that's helpful, but it's not the resolution to the very serious issues.
I'm not suggesting it's a resolution, but it might help along along the stages which I'm suggesting that we need to see that work being done.
It might also help, Chairman, if the Minister was to write to the Public Prosecution Service, Barry McGrory, inquiring if they have taken any actions arising from the AG's report, and has the recommendations actually been applied. I know we don't know what the recommendations are, but has anything been done? Because if there's been recommendations made, then surely you don't have to wait for the outcome of a case, of an appeal, to actually carry out recommendations where flaws were identified.
Mr. Dixon, you want to...
Just asking the Minister to comment, and I welcome his offer to raise the matter in those general terms with the Police Ombudsman. But just to say, does the Minister agree that it is important, and he has clearly set it out, that his knowledge of the boundaries and relationships between him and those other organisations, the PPS and the Police Ombudsman, are very important boundaries, and they themselves set public confidence, and that it would be unfortunate, if not disastrous, if the Department of Justice were to make knee-jerk reactions to issues as they arise, but rather that space should be given for those bodies to conduct their work, and it is only at the time of a perceived failure after that that it is appropriate for the Department to become involved.
Well, I think, Chair, Stuart reminds me of the concerns of what went wrong at times in this society in the past, when there appeared to be political interference in the work of different agencies. I remember not long after I became Minister reading a report of an event some 40 years previously, where there was a recommendation of prosecution for murder against 2 soldiers, which was recommended by the RUC and turned down by the then Attorney General for Northern Ireland, an elected politician. So that is why we have these complex structures, to ensure that people don't have concerns about political interference. And it is how we get that balance between wider oversight of the system and encouraging agencies to cooperate and work together, which will actually be a focus of meetings I have later today, alongside recognising the operational independence of the different agencies.
Thank you.
Mr. McCartney.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I mean, I join in the sort of that this is an issue which obviously needs our attention, and I think we need a process, or perhaps it's processes, they assist that process of full disclosure. I mean, notwithstanding the way the Minister has laid out the different parameters, and I think that's understandable. And obviously there's a second part of the meeting where we'll be looking at other ways of doing this. But I mean, I believe that we should perhaps, and the Minister has made the offer, and I think Emmett Poots has sort of put the suggestion that we should write or the Minister should write to the PPS. I think maybe the committee should write to the Ombudsman and ask him for a timeline. Notwithstanding, the timeline that you have provided, and I mean, dealing with our complaints not of this nature, I want to stress that, sometimes there can be frustration over the length of time it takes for a report to be finally published and given to the complainant. And I think it's the same with the PPS's public statement. He is now only asked an independent legal expert to review this, and he finds he's always saying that, if there are lessons to be learned, we will do so openly and transparently. Perhaps they ask him what he means by that, and perhaps get a public commitment that he'll publish the findings of the independent legal expert, and that may assist the process of full disclosure in this. But that would be my observation. It's not really a question as such, Chair.
Mr. Elliott.
Chair, thank you, and thank you, Minister. You did say, Minister, that there are a number of statutory procedures to look at aspects of the case, and then you went on to say that you will be reviewing the matters raised in the Spotlight programme yourself, along with your officials. I'm just wondering, when can we expect you to review that with your officials, and would you then maybe come back and give us an update to this committee as to your findings and where you think responsibility lies? Because what I'm concerned about is that everything gets lost in a mire of different organisations, where the Police Ombudsman is looking at part of it, the Public Prosecution Service is looking at part of it, and we don't get an overall picture. So I'm wondering if there is a role for yourself in doing that overall picture and review of it. And my specific question is, when can you do that initial review and come back to us?
Chair, I'm sure members wouldn't expect an entirely frank answer to that with the senior official who will have the responsibility sitting beside me, probably about to kick me on the shins. I mean, I would certainly hope that we could look at the implications of the programme that might fall to the department and some of those wider issues that have been raised about a former Secretary of State within a relatively short period to at least establish, where there is a role. In terms of the offer I made to write to others, about their anticipated timescales, that's something which can be done fairly immediately. But I would be very reticent to give a timescale. I will certainly give a commitment to write to the committee as soon as we have something worth writing to the committee about, and if the committee wish me to come back to discuss it, I'll happily do so.
Chairman, we're a bit reluctant to take that as a given answer, simply because it's almost kicking it into touch. I would prefer that we were clear that there is a timeline that you can come back within a week or 2 weeks with your initial review as to where you see all the separate processes and how you can maybe be an overarching look at all that, and at least that we will know where the process is.
Well, sometimes you have a kick for touch, hoping for a quick throw in and an immediate movement forward. I accept that you would like me to be more specific than I feel I realistically can be. I mean, I could give you a specific promise this morning, but I'm not prepared to give you a promise which wouldn't necessarily be deliverable. It will be as soon as possible. That, I believe, is the best answer I can give you.
Can we tie it down to some degree? Are you talking about days? Are you talking about a short number of weeks?
I would think we're talking about a short number of weeks.
Okay. 2 weeks.
A short number of weeks, Chair.
We've got recess obviously next week, so we're not meeting that week. So the following week would allow for 2 weeks. Because obviously the committee will have to deliberate on our potential own inquiry, but it would be helpful to know the department's position. And my view is, you're the Minister for Justice. You have the responsibility to ensure public confidence, and therefore the buck stops with you, and you should be doing that work rather than this committee having to do it for your department. So I think the onus in the first instance is on you, and then the committee can consider how we could support that. Is there any parallel process that we can do? First, I think the committee will need to know what you are going to do by way of looking into the issues that we have raised. Mr McGuinness has a point to make.
Sorry, just on that point, Chair, there are certain circumstances in which it is easier for the committee to conduct an inquiry under its responsibilities than the department. But I will give a commitment. We will come back to the committee as soon as we can in a short number of weeks.
If it may be that we work together on this one.
Well, I suspect there will need to be some informal discussions between your staff and mine.
Mr McGuinness.
Thank you very much, and I thank the Minister for coming and being so frank with the committee. But I think if we distill what you have said, Minister, there's very little you can do.
Well, I tried to make the point at the beginning that the responsibilities lie, largely in terms of the complaints which have so far been made with the agencies responsible and the bodies which have oversight.
Yes,
there.
but
the issue that I am then concerned to look at with my team is whether there are issues relating to the joining up of the system or some of the wider issues which have been highlighted from the television programme, which don't fall directly to those agencies, and whether there is a role for the department and indeed what the role of the committee might be.
But such is the fragmentation of the authority dealing with various aspects of this case that you as a minister, you really don't have any overall role.
But certainly it is the issue of the operational matters where there is no role for the minister in that respect, yes.
Yeah. But it seems to me that, given your frankness here, that really there's nothing, you're not promising the committee anything today, and in 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time, it seems to me that you'll come to the committee with very little.
Well, I have at least promised the committee today that I would write to some of those agencies at least about a timeline. Sorry, you're referring to my frankness. I like to think my relationship with the committee is generally frank, and straightforward, and that we have a reasonable working relationship. And there's no point in suggesting I can do more than I can actually do.
No, I'm
but at the same time, I'm very concerned, not just about Maria Cahill, but also about other young women who may be in a similar position from her suggestions.
Yeah, well, when I say you're being frank, I think you're being honest and open. I'm not in any way being sarcastic or
Sorry, I didn't imply you were.
or anything like that. I think that's very helpful for us to determine a way through all of this. That's really by way of comments. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Douglas is the last one.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming this morning. I know you had a busy day yesterday. Minister, you'd mentioned that you're going to work with your officials and look at this, the programme. And also, I suppose for me, I'm just a bit unclear what your role is in some of this stuff. Maybe you could clarify this in terms of, say, like of this, the Public Prosecution Service this morning. This goes into, weeks, months, whatever. Have you a role of intervention to speed that up? Or are you saying this morning that, I think that's one of my biggest fears is that, Edwin Poots mentioned this morning about the social services. There may be an inquiry into there, that's been a suggestion, whatever. And there could be others as things develop over the coming weeks. So you could have all these various inquiries, all these various bodies been involved. And for me, there has to be that sense of cohesion. Someone needs to bring all that together. So are you saying this morning that should be this committee, and possibly, as our chair said, along with yourself after you sit down? So all I'm saying is, what is your overall role in this here, and can you intervene at any stage? Some of these things.
Well, when you use the word intervene, the answer is largely no. It's really the point which I responded to Stuart on. Because of past history in Northern Ireland, we have a very complex system of ensuring independence. The idea of that independence for the various agencies was to ensure that there was no political interference, to ensure that confidence was raised in the workings of those bodies, that they had their oversight arrangements and they had their independent operational accountability. The difficulty that I see now, some years on from when those arrangements were set up, is that to some extent the danger to public confidence comes not from the issue of the decisions being taken and the oversight of the agencies, but of the difficulties of joining up the system as a whole, which is where I believe, particularly on things like the time taken. And there may be issues like this case, whether there are matters between different agencies, where there is potentially damage to public confidence because people see things taking too long. That's why, for example, the work we've done around young people, it's been about speeding up the system, and we've had good cooperation. But independent agencies have to recognise they're interdependent as well as independent. But the independence is something which has been emphasised. I think we need to look over the next few years as to how the system functions to provide that greater cohesiveness that you mentioned of the system as a whole, without interfering operationally, and it is actually quite a challenge to get that across.
Yeah. And finally, you mentioned about your officials and our officials and working together. Would you be keen to work with this committee, or are there any particular problems that you would envisage with that?
I'm always keener to work with this committee than against it anyway. I mean, the reality is we have good working relationships, and I'm quite happy that we look over the next couple of weeks at the... Oh, sorry, that came close to a commitment to Tom. Over the next few weeks, we look to see what the best way of approaching these issues is, recognising the role of the agencies and seeing how the department and the committee can best work together, as, for example, we have done on issues like victims and witnesses in the past.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
All through.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, I know the questions that we ask here today are somewhat of a technical nature, and it's hard enough for us as elected members to understand the intricacies and the mechanics of government and the justice system and your role, Minister, and everything within it. But I can't help but think that for individuals who have been living with this over the last number of years, sometimes maybe even for decades, who have had to live through what can only be described as a notorious and murky world, and maybe over the last couple of weeks they've seen a bit of light with regards to the courage and bravery of Maria Cahill, but are still unsure about coming forward with their evidence. If they were watching this today, I don't think anything that of the questions that we have asked and the answer that you've given would actually reassure them to come forward. And I suppose what we've heard is a can't-do attitude, regrettably, a can't-do attitude, and not my remit, not my fault, not my responsibility, can't do this, can't do that. Now, I know that I don't want to seem to be hard on you, Minister, because I know you're setting out your stall, you're setting out what you're responsible for and what you're not. But for someone who doesn't understand the complexities and intricacies of this place and the way it works, what can you say to those people who we need them to come out for their own sake and for their family members and other people who may well be in that position today? What is the message that you want to get to those people?
I think there's a clear message that since the time that Maria Cahill came forward to the police, the work which we have done collectively, the legislation we've put through of support for victims and witnesses, means that anybody who would come forward now would have an expectation to be better treated than she felt treated. I think the ongoing publicity around this case has made it clear that it will now be responded to in a way that perhaps her case was not responded to quite so clearly. I think the fact that there is the level of public and political interest in the way this is being handled would be an incentive to ensure that anybody who would have formal dealings with a subsequent complainant would have a better understanding of the issues and would be better placed, say, alongside the work we've done to respond better to those victims. But ultimately, it is for those who are victims of crime to come forward and report. And I would certainly encourage any of them to do so. And I would certainly hope that what we've now got in a variety of different support services would make life significantly easier for anybody who were to report it this week.
Are you fully confident in the bodies that will have a job of work to do going forward, whether that be the Ombudsman's Office, Police Ombudsman's Office, the PSNI, the DPP? Are you fully confident that they will be able to give these people support that they deserve?
Being asked to be fully confident in agencies that are not directly accountable to me is always a risk. What I am confident is that the work which we have done over the last few years, in which those agencies have been participants, is ensuring that victims are treated better than they were not that many years ago at the time when Maria came forward.
See, Minister, you need to be fully confident. You can't not have full confidence in them, because you're responsible for engendering public confidence in all of these agencies. So that's...
But full confidence implies that I am satisfied that every single person who works for every public agency is always doing their absolute best for their entire working week. Now, I think that's a fairly high charge. If the charge is, are we managing things better? Are organisations structured in a way which responds to the needs of victims better? Do we have means of supporting victims across all the agencies? Are we embedding a better culture? Then we are in a significantly better place. But we always have to work to get it from the 99% towards the 100%.
The Police Ombudsman previously called in the Criminal Justice Inspectorate at the time Al Hutchison was in charge, and it led to his downfall, or at least it accelerated it, because of the accusations that the Ombudsman's Office weren't properly investigating the state in respect of the past. Now, I'm making it clear that the Ombudsman's Office, in dealing with my complaint, has compounded the concerns of a failure on the part of the police to properly investigate one of the most senior politicians on the island of Ireland because of his particular political background. Now, if I can't get a response from the Ombudsman's Office, and it's taking over a year, how can Maria Cahill expect to get an adequate response, or any other victim that has suffered. Now, I don't think it's good enough that we leave this to the Ombudsman's Office and we leave it to the PPS. And I do think when you consider all of the evidence, you get the opportunity to review what was in the Spotlight programme, and you've given a commitment that you will consider what you could do, that you seriously consider having an independent inquiry of some description that will look at the holistic picture of the criminal justice system, so that the public can have confidence, full confidence, that all of those agencies will do their job without fear or favour, irrespective of who is alleged having carried out the abuse. I think that's going to be critically important as we move forward. It will be important for this committee as we deliberate what we could do to support you. And we are here to scrutinise and to hold you to account, but we're also here to support. And I hope that we can together work collaboratively to support each other, because I think we share the same aims and the same objectives in dealing with this, and hopefully we can move forward in that constructive approach.
I have no doubt we share the same aims and objectives of improving the experience of those who come into contact with the criminal justice system. But we need to ensure that we do that in the most effective way, and we need to ensure that we do it in a joined-up way. I appreciate the work which the committee has done with the department over recent years to make that better, but I'm not suggesting that we've got things perfect yet by any means.
Minister, I appreciate your time with the committee this morning. Thank you very much. Okay, members, there was an options paper provided in terms of advice, and obviously you will have heard what the Minister has indicated, that he will be considering what could be done in respect of his role as Minister for Justice, and obviously that will have some influence in respect of what the committee may or may not wish to do, and I don't want to obviously prejudice with my own views what I think the committee should be doing in respect of that, but undoubtedly the Minister will have a role in influencing what we would want to do. So the options were provided to members, and I trust that they have been made available to each committee member. There's a number of points that has been made in it in terms of should we have terms of reference, then we would need to take advice about any prospect that might call individuals who make themselves known to the committee as victims but have not notified the police. That's obviously in a very general sense if you opened it up for anyone to approach the committee. Similarly, we may want to share any terms of reference with the PSNI, and obviously issues, and the Minister touched on this, that are of a pre-devolutionary matter. And obviously there's some steps about the Minister writing to do with the cases that have been there. So I'm open for members' comments to be made in respect of that advice in terms of how the committee would wish to proceed. I don't intend obviously asking the committee to decide now about having an inquiry, but I think there are some issues that we could get advice upon, and that the Minister, when he comes back to us in hopefully 2 weeks' time, we can have those advice by way of committee inquiry at that point, and then take an informed decision. Mr. McGuinness.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't think that the Minister will come back, and I'm anticipating what the Minister will say, but I don't anticipate he'll come back and say, look, I can do an awful lot in relation to resolving the issues that arise out of the Maria Cahill case. I think that he'll come back and basically repeat what he has said, because authority here is so fragmented, the PPS, police ombudsman, police themselves and so forth. So I don't think that we can expect very much there. We're masters in our own house. I think we exercise the lawful authority that is held by this committee, and that's the way I think we should go. I'm mindful of the advice given by Ms Dunwoody in relation to any other victims that might arise out of this situation, and mindful of that advice. I'm also mindful of liaising with the PSNI, but I think we should remember that quite apart from the legal aspects of this, there are political issues here that need to be addressed, and political interference is a political issue. It's not just simply a legal issue. And I think that we should be mindful of that when we come to make up our collective mind in relation to this issue.
Mr McCartney?
I think a couple of observations, Chair. In relation to, the suggestion which I made earlier in relation to writing to the Ombudsman and the PPS, is that something we're going to do just to see what their timelines are and who's the independent expert, what's his terms or her terms of reference?
Yeah, if the committee's agreeable, we'll do that. That's in respect of the current case. Obviously, the committee, the Minister's indicated he was going to write about the case that I have highlighted as an individual MLA. If the committee wishes, the committee could now write about that particular case to get answers as to why the Ombudsman's office hasn't yet published it.
But the timeline would be beneficial to us, whatever, in terms of how we take it forward and what the terms of reference are going to be. If we have that might help it inform our decision. And the R aspect of it is, it was just something I was reading here. I'll just come back to that, Chair. It was just something in the paper, okay?
Mr. Frew?
Yeah, I certainly would agree that we need to be writing to all these bodies, obviously with a plethora of responsibilities, Ariad, the way it is. But with regard to your specific complaint, I do think that, as a matter of principle, I think the committee here should be picking that up off you now, and looking to see as a committee that we can try and assure ourselves that everything's being done. One specific question around that specific complaint, Chair, is that were you receiving the 6-week updates? You were getting that, but you've yet not seen the final report. I think this committee should pick that up as a principle and see where it's at and why it has taken so long.
Okay. Well, obviously, we will await what the Minister comes to this committee. My initial view will be, and the committee can obviously get advice on this, that at this stage, if we were to consider an inquiry, it will be around the particular case that's been highlighted by the BBC Spotlight programme. I have indicated that there are similarities in the UTV Insight programme and how that case has been handled. And at this point, my own view, and it will be for the committee to discuss and agree in a number of weeks' time, but that there are two cases, and that's that of Anya and of Maria, that should be subject to consideration by this committee. Obviously, at this stage, we don't know about other victims, and I think that will be difficult for the committee to get into, but here we have two cases that I think the committee could get into if that's what it was minded to do, and obviously we can take advice on that in preparation for the committee's consideration in 2 weeks' time, when hopefully the Minister has a paper drawn up in terms of what he intends to do in respect of that. So if members are content.
I found that it was the pre-devolution. That would be perhaps an issue we need some clarity on.
Yeah, I think we've got.
We'll be running that with
that's right.
The appointment of the
judges.
The judges, that might be just something we can need a bit of clarity, the remit in terms of pre-devolution stuff.
Okay, so if members are content, we'll get advice around how the committee could look into those two cases in preparation for 2 weeks' time, and we'll consider that, Mr. McGlone.
Just one thing, listening to Maria Cahill, it may well be that other cases, according to her, there may well be other cases there, so how that impacts upon the deliberations of the committee if they do emerge.
Yeah. Very briefly, because I know the committee, there's another committee that's supposed to be meeting now, so we're going to...
Just following on from Tom's point, I was saying that there are going to be these two cases, but there may be others that come up if they're relevant and to those, to link into those ends. So we're going to have that sense of flexibility to some degree, Chair.
Well, I think that's something the committee will need to consider as to if that was something the committee was to do, how you could manage that, knowing that that's an unknown, quantifiable. What we do know is there are two specific ones that I think we could look at, and the committee will need to consider obviously the remit and scope of any terms of reference that we would look at, but we'll get advice on those issues then for the meeting in 2 weeks' time, and hopefully the Minister will have responded to us as well, and we'll action the other issues that were discussed in the meeting as well. Okay, members, thank you very much.